The rain had already soaked through Elias's jacket before he noticed the car. It sat crooked along the shoulder of the highway, hazard lights blinking in a slow, tired rhythm. No other traffic, just wet asphalt stretching into the dark. He almost kept driving. Gas was low. His daughter would be asleep by the time he got home if he didn't hurry. But something about the way the woman stood beside the car too still, arms wrapped tight around herself, made him slow down. He pulled over 20 yards ahead and walked back through the rain. The tire was shredded. Not worn, not punctured. Shredded. Elias crouched beside it, rain dripping from his hair, fingers brushing the torn rubber. He didn't say anything at first, but a quiet feeling settled in his chest. Something about this road had gone wrong, and it hadn't happened by accident. The rain had been steady for almost an hour before Elias saw the car. Not heavy rain, just enough to keep the road slick and the windshield working harder than it should. The wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeak every few seconds. He kept meaning to replace them. The highway was quiet in the way roads get late at night, when most people have already decided where they're sleeping. Elias drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the heater vent. The warmth helped his fingers after a long shift. Grease still lived in the lines of his skin, no matter how much soap he used at the shop. He checked the clock on the dashboard. 10:42, later than he promised. His daughter would already be asleep. He pictured the small lamp she kept on beside her bed. She never liked a completely dark room. He used to tell her the light helped the house know she was safe. She believed that. He thought about that as the road curved slightly ahead. Then the hazard lights appeared. At first they looked like reflections in the rain, 2 orange flashes. Then they blinked again, steady and patient. A car on the shoulder. Elias slowed without thinking. Not everyone stopped for things like that anymore. The highway taught people to mind their own business. He passed the car slowly. Dark sedan. Expensive. New. And a woman standing beside it. She wasn't waving for help. She wasn't pacing or checking her phone. She was just standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, looking down the empty road. That part made him uneasy. People usually did something when they were stranded. He drove another 10 seconds before deciding. Then he sighed and eased the truck onto the shoulder ahead. The engine ticked softly after he shut it off. Rain tapped the roof. For a moment he stayed in the seat. His gas gauge hovered just above empty. The heater stopped blowing warm air now that the engine was off. He thought about the drive home again. Then he opened the door. The cold rain hit him right away. He pulled his jacket tighter and walked back along the edge of the road, boots splashing through shallow water gathering near the gravel. The woman noticed him halfway there. She straightened slightly, like someone preparing for something uncertain. Elias raised a hand. Evening. His voice sounded calm. It usually did. Years of talking to customers who were already frustrated with their cars had trained that into him. She studied him for a second before answering. Hi. Her voice was controlled. Careful. Up close, he noticed things he hadn't seen from the truck. Her coat was expensive. Dark wool, clean lines. The kind of coat people wore to places where doors were held open for them. Rain had dampened her hair near the edges, but the rest was still neat, like she had only been standing outside a few minutes. Her car sat behind her, the driver's side rear tire sagging low against the wet pavement. Flat. Elias walked around the back slowly and crouched beside it. Water soaked through the knees of his jeans right away. He didn't react to that. He leaned closer, running his fingers along the torn edge of the tire. The rubber hung open in jagged strips, not a nail, not a slow leak. Something had ripped through it. He pressed the edge gently, feeling the structure inside. Steel cords exposed, the woman spoke behind him. I think I must have hit something. Her words sounded like a guess she'd already repeated to herself. Elias stayed crouched for a moment longer. Rain slid off the edge of his nose. Then he stood. Got a spare? She hesitated. I assume so. I haven't looked. He nodded once and walked to the trunk. She unlocked it with a small click from her key. The trunk lifted smoothly. Inside was the spare kit, still sealed neatly in its compartment. Everything unused. He almost smiled at that. First flat, She gave a small nod. I usually have someone handle things like this. He didn't comment. He pulled the jack out and set it on the wet pavement. The road hummed faintly beneath his boots. Not from traffic, just the distant sound highways carry through the ground at night. He positioned the jack under the frame. The woman watched him quietly. Not hovering, just observing. Rain gathered along the edge of her sleeve. You don't have to do this, she said after a moment. Elias turned the handle slowly, lifting the car inch by inch. It's fine. Another pause. You were headed somewhere. Home. She looked down the empty road again. I appreciate it. He nodded without looking at her. The tire lifted clear of the pavement. He reached for the lug wrench. The first bolt resisted. He leaned his weight into it. It cracked loose with a sharp sound. The others followed easier. Rain thickened slightly. Water trickled down the back of his neck now. He didn't rush. Years of mechanical work had taught him patience with stubborn metal, but as he removed the wheel, something tugged quietly at his attention. A detail that didn't fit. He turned the damaged tire slightly in his hands. The tear ran along the sidewall, too clean in some places, too deliberate. He ran his thumb along one edge. The rubber separated easily, like something had sliced it first. He paused. The woman noticed. Is it bad? He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the tire. Rain tapped against the metal rim. Finally he said, It's strange. How? Elias stood slowly and set the tire down. He wiped his hands on his jeans without realizing. Then he looked at the road. Both directions. Empty. No headlights, no passing trucks. Just the long stretch of wet highway disappearing into darkness. Something old moved quietly through his thoughts. The kind of feeling that didn't come from imagination. It came from patterns. From nights on roads that didn't feel right. He looked back at the tire again. Then at the woman. You didn't feel anything before it blew? She shook her head. Just a loud pop. Then the car pulled sideways. Elias nodded slowly. That made sense. But the tire didn't. He crouched again, examining the tear one more time. Rain gathered along the inside of the rubber. His fingers traced the edge carefully. And there it was again. That same quiet pressure in his chest, like a memory trying to stand up. He spoke almost to himself. Sidewalls don't fail like this. The woman frowned slightly. What do you mean? Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked down the road again. Still empty. But the night suddenly felt different. He stood, breathing slowly. Then he picked up the spare tire and rolled it toward the car. Look at you moving first. His voice stayed calm. But inside, something had started turning. The road behind them felt too quiet, and Elias had spent enough years around dangerous roads to know. Sometimes the problem wasn't the car. Sometimes the problem was the place where the car had stopped. The spare tire was lighter than the one he had taken off. Most were. Elias lifted it into place and held it steady with one knee while threading the first lug nut by hand. Rain slid down his sleeve and into his palm. The metal felt cold, slick. He worked without rushing. The woman had stepped a few feet back now. Not hiding from the rain exactly. Just giving him room. People who were used to solving problems themselves tended to hover. She didn't. That detail stayed with him. He tightened the bolts partway and lowered the jack slowly. The car settled onto the spare with a dull shift of weight. When the tire met the pavement, he leaned in and finished tightening each lug nut in a steady cross pattern. Old habit. The wrench clicked softly against the metal. For a moment the only sounds were rain and the faint hiss of water moving along the road's shallow edges. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Elias noticed them in the reflection on the wet pavement before he saw the vehicle itself. Far off. Coming fast. He didn't react outwardly. Just stood and wiped his hands again. The woman turned when she saw the light too. Her posture changed a little. Not fear. More like recognition of something expected. You're almost done, she said quietly. Yeah? The headlights grew larger. Bright. Too bright for a normal sedan. Elias squinted slightly as the vehicle approached. Then another set of lights appeared behind it, and another, 3 vehicles, all moving quickly but controlled, keeping equal distance between them. Something about the formation stirred a memory in him, the way a certain smell can pull you somewhere you hadn't thought about in years. He had seen that kind of spacing before, not on civilian roads. The first vehicle slowed sharply when it saw the parked car. The others followed immediately. Black SUVs. Heavy ones. They stopped in a loose triangle around the sedan and Elias's truck, engines idling with a low vibration. The doors opened almost at the same moment. Men stepped out, 4 of them from the first vehicle, 2 more from the second, all wearing dark jackets that shed the rain easily. No shouting, no confusion. They moved with the quiet speed of people who already knew exactly where they needed to stand. One of them approached the woman first. "Ma'am." His voice was low but firm. She nodded once. "I'm fine." The man looked briefly at Elias. Just a glance. But it was a professional glance, measuring. Elias recognized that too. Not police. Not exactly military either. Somewhere in the middle. Private security with serious training. Another man crouched near the rear tire Elias had removed. He lifted it slightly and studied the tear. His expression tightened. Elias watched him without speaking. The man stood and looked toward the others. Not road damage. Elias felt the quiet confirmation settle in his chest. He had already known. The first man turned toward him now. "You changed this tire?" Elias nodded. "Yeah." "How long were you here?" "Maybe 10 minutes. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the road in both directions. Rain beaded on his shaved head. Then he asked, "Did you see anyone else stop?" "No." Another pause. The man seemed to consider something. Then he stepped closer. "Thank you for stopping." His tone softened slightly, though the alertness in his eyes never left. Elias shrugged. "Just a tire." The woman stepped forward then. Actually, it wasn't just that. The security man glanced at her. She spoke calmly, but the strain underneath it was beginning to show now that other people had arrived. "I lost control for a moment. If he hadn't stopped." She didn't finish. The man nodded once. Then he turned back to Elias. "Name?" "Elias." "Last name?" Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Walker." The man studied him again. Not suspicious exactly, just thorough. Occupation? Mechanic. A faint shift in the man's expression. He looked down briefly at the tire again, then back up. "You noticed something about it, didn't you?" Elias considered lying. Old instincts sometimes suggested it. Less attention meant fewer complications. But the tire was sitting right there in the open, its torn sidewall obvious under the rain. So he said simply, "It didn't look normal." "What part?" "The tear." The man waited. Elias crouched and turned the damaged tire slightly. Rainwater collected in the exposed layers. Sidewall failures usually look messy. Random. He pointed to the edge. "This part looks cut first." The security man leaned down closer. Another guard joined him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then the second guard exhaled slowly. "Yeah." The first man stood again. The air around the group had changed now. It wasn't panic. It was focus. He spoke quietly into a small radio clip near his collar. "Rear tire confirmed compromised. Looks deliberate." A brief pause. Static crackled. Then a voice answered faintly. Elias couldn't make out the words. The man nodded once to himself and lowered the radio. The woman stood a few feet away now, watching the road again. Rain slid from the edge of her coat. Elias followed her gaze. The highway remained empty. But the feeling from earlier hadn't left him. In fact, it had grown sharper. He looked down at the tire again, then slowly at the pavement around where the car had stopped. A thought moved through his mind. Not fully formed yet, just a quiet piece of instinct trying to connect things. He stepped a few feet away and crouched again. The nearest guard noticed. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer right away. He ran his fingers along the wet asphalt near the shoulder. Tiny fragments caught the light when a guard's flashlight swung briefly in his direction. Metal. Very small. Sharp. Spread across a narrow patch of pavement. Elias picked one up between his fingers. The guard leaned closer. Caltrops. Elias shook his head slowly. No. He held the fragment up to the light. Machined. Not random scrap. Too clean. Too uniform. He dropped it back to the ground. The quiet pressure in his chest settled deeper now. The security man watched him carefully. You've seen something like this before? Elias straightened slowly. Rain ran down the side of his face. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, almost reluctantly, yeah. The man waited. Elias looked down the dark highway again. His voice stayed calm. Not usually just one tire. The guard's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Elias gestured lightly toward the road ahead. If someone wanted to crash, they wouldn't rely on luck. A long pause passed. The security man followed his gaze into the darkness. The rain thickened slightly again. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled quietly across the sky. And Elias felt something settle inside him, a recognition he had hoped never to feel again, because whoever had damaged that tire probably wasn't finished yet. The rain didn't let up. It fell steadily across the road and the roofs of the SUVs, turning the highway into a long ribbon of dull reflection. The flashing hazard lights from the sedan painted slow pulses across the wet pavement. No one moved for a few seconds after Elias spoke. The security man kept watching the dark stretch of road ahead like he expected something to appear. What makes you think that? He asked finally. Elias shifted his weight slightly. He wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. Not here. Not with people who understood roads and danger almost as well as he did. He looked down at the metal fragments again. They're too small for a blowout that clean, he said, and they're not scattered wide enough to be debris. One of the guards crouched and used a flashlight. The beam swept slowly across the asphalt. More fragments glinted back. Not many, but enough. Looks placed, the guard muttered. The security man straightened. Purpose? Elias rubbed the back of his neck, rain soaking deeper into his jacket. To weaken the tire first, he said. Then pressure finishes the job. The woman stepped a little closer. You're saying someone damaged the tire on purpose? Elias didn't look at her when he answered. Looks that way. Another guard walked a few yards farther down the road with a light. His voice came back through the rain. There's more here. The beam moved slowly along the shoulder. Tiny pieces of metal appeared again in a faint line. The security man swore under his breath. He spoke into his radio again, voice quieter now. Possible stage tire damage along shoulder. Check road ahead. Static crackled. A reply came back quickly this time. The guard's posture stiffened. Elias noticed. Something in that response had changed the situation. The security man lowered the radio and looked at the woman. We need to move. She nodded immediately. No argument. Two guards moved toward the sedan, preparing to drive. But Elias was still staring at the road. Something wasn't sitting right. He took a few steps forward, away from the group. The rain softened the edges of the highway, but patterns still showed through if you looked long enough. He crouched again. His hand brushed the pavement. Then he stood and walked another few yards ahead. The security man noticed. Elias. He didn't respond at first. He kept walking slowly along the shoulder. Then he stopped. The road dipped slightly ahead where a drainage culvert passed underneath. Not a big drop. Just enough that headlights from oncoming vehicles would angle differently for a moment. Elias stared at it. The memory that had been trying to surface finally came through clearly. Convoys, old highways overseas, long nights with the same quiet tension. The worst places weren't the obvious ones. They were the places where drivers lost control for a second, where speed and surprise did the work. He turned back toward the group. You shouldn't drive yet. The security man's eyes narrowed. Why? Elias pointed toward the dip. If the tire blew there instead of here, she might have crossed the center line. One of the guards followed his gesture. And? Elias took a breath. Rain ran down his temple. That's where someone would be waiting. The group fell quiet. The woman watched him carefully now. You're assuming a lot. Elias nodded slightly. Yeah. Then he added quietly. But the road's set up for it. The security man studied the stretch of highway again. One of the SUV's headlights cast a wide beam across the dip. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the guard with a flashlight walked farther ahead. "Hold up!" Everyone turned. His beam had stopped near the edge of the road. "Something's here." Two others moved toward him. Elias followed a few steps behind. The guard knelt near the culvert opening. Rainwater trickled through the metal grate beneath the road, but it wasn't the water he had seen. It was the tire marks, faint but visible. Fresh rubber streaks where a vehicle had stopped earlier that night. The security man crouched beside him. "Parked here?" "Looks like it." "Facing which direction?" The guard angled the light toward the road. The meaning settled slowly among them. A car had been waiting there, hidden slightly below the grade of the highway, watching traffic, waiting for someone to lose control near the dip. The woman folded her arms again, though it wasn't for warmth this time. How long ago? The guard ran his fingers over the damp rubber marks. Maybe an hour. Elias exhaled quietly. The security man stood. Then they left. Probably. Elias didn't sound convinced. The men looked at him. "You think they're still out here?" Elias glanced toward the tree line far beyond the shoulder. Dark shapes beyond the reach of the headlights. Rain made everything softer and harder to read, but the feeling remained. The quiet pressure behind his ribs. "I think this wasn't just one idea," he said. The security man waited. Elias gestured lightly down the highway. "If the crash didn't happen here..." He paused, then finished the thought. "They'd expect the car to keep moving." Another silence. The rain filled it. The guard with the flashlight straightened slowly. "You think there's more?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked at the sedan, then the SUVs, then the road stretching forward into darkness. He had spent years learning how people designed problems for moving vehicles, and whoever had done this had started with a tire, which meant the real plan probably waited farther ahead. He met the security man's eyes. "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "I think we're only at the first part." For a moment no one spoke. The rain had settled into a slow, steady fall that softened every sound except the idling engines. Water ran along the grooves of the road, forming thin streams that slipped toward the culvert. The security man looked back toward the vehicles. "Everyone back," he said. Not loudly, just firm. The guards moved immediately. Two returned to the SUVs. One stayed beside the woman, guiding her gently away from the edge of the road. Elias remained where he was for a second longer, staring at the faint tire marks near the culvert. A vehicle had waited there. Not parked casually. Positioned, facing the road like a hunter watching a path. He straightened slowly and walked back toward the group. The security man waited for him beside the sedan. "You said you've seen setups like this before." It wasn't a question exactly. Elias rubbed his hands together, trying to get some warmth back into them. "A long time ago." "Military?" Elias looked past him toward the dark highway. "Something like that." The man studied him for a moment, but didn't push further. Instead, he gestured toward the damaged tire still lying on the pavement. "You noticed it faster than we did." Elias shrugged slightly. "Mechanics notice tires." The man almost smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not like that." Behind them, one of the guards opened the rear door of the lead SUV and spoke quietly into a larger radio unit mounted inside. The glow from the dashboard lit his face in pale blue. The woman stood nearby, arms folded again, but this time her attention stayed on Elias. "You said the crash might have been meant for that dip," she said. "Yes." "What would happen after that?" Elias hesitated. He didn't like speaking possibilities out loud. But the question hung there. "If a car spins there," he said slowly, "the driver usually tries to correct. And they drift toward the shoulder." He pointed toward the trees, or the ditch. One of the guards followed his hand with a flashlight beam. The ditch wasn't deep, but the ground beyond it sloped down sharply into a line of thick brush and low trees, enough to hide a vehicle, or people. The security man nodded once, understanding. Ambush position. Elias didn't answer. The word felt heavier than he wanted. The man turned toward the road again. How far ahead would the next setup be? Elias thought about that. Rain tapped softly on the metal hood of the sedan beside them. If someone expected the car to keep moving, he said, they'd prepare another chance. How far? Elias looked down the highway again. The dark seemed endless in that direction, but planning like this followed patterns. Distances, timing, enough road for speed to build again. Half a mile, he said finally. Maybe a mile. One of the guards returned from the SUV. Local patrol's been notified, he reported quietly, but response time's unclear out here. The security man nodded. Then he looked at Elias again. You know this kind of thing. Elias shifted slightly. I used to ride with convoy teams. The man's expression sharpened. Overseas? Yeah. Another pause passed between them. The man seemed to weigh something. Then he said, if there's another trap ahead, we need to know before we drive into it. Elias felt the attention of the entire group shift toward him. He didn't like that. Not because he couldn't handle it, because it meant stepping back into a mindset he had buried for years. He looked at his truck sitting quietly ahead on the shoulder. Old, rust near the wheel wells. A toolbox rattling softly in the bed when wind moved through it. A normal life. Then he looked back at the road. A flat tire that wasn't random. Metal fragments placed carefully. A waiting vehicle near the culvert. Someone had built this night piece by piece. And if he ignored it, someone might die a few miles from here. Elias let out a slow breath. I can check. The security man's head tilted slightly. How? Elias nodded toward the lead SUV. Drive slow, lights wide, watch the shoulders. The guard beside the vehicle spoke up. That exposes us. Elias shook his head slightly. No. He pointed toward the road ahead again. They expect speed. The man listened. If you slow down, Elias continued, you take away the timing. Rainwater slid off the brim of the guard's jacket. The security man considered it. Lead vehicle scouts. Others hold back. Yeah. Another guard spoke quietly. And if something's waiting, Elias looked at him. Then we'll see it before it sees us clearly. The man gave a small nod. The woman stepped closer. Her voice was calm again, but a thin thread of tension ran through it. You're suggesting we continue down the same road where someone just tried to kill me? Elias met her eyes. Yes. Why? Because whoever set this up expects you to stop or panic. She studied him carefully. Rain clung to her hair near her temples now. And if we don't? Elias glanced toward the dark highway once more. Then their plan starts falling apart. The security man made a quiet decision then. All right. He turned to his team. Lead SUV moves first. Walker rides with us. Elias blinked. That's not necessary. It is, the man said. You saw things we didn't. The guard opened the rear door of the lead vehicle. Warm light spilled out. Elias hesitated only briefly. Then he walked toward it. The inside smelled faintly of leather and electronics. He climbed in. The door shut with a solid thud, muting the rain outside. Through the windshield, the highway stretched forward in long, wet lines. The engine shifted into gear. Slowly, the SUV began rolling. Behind them, the other vehicles followed at a distance. Elias watched the road carefully. Every shadow, every reflection, every place the pavement dipped or curved. The woman sat in the seat beside the driver now, speaking quietly into a phone. Her voice stayed controlled, but Elias caught fragments. Security breach? Road incident? Yes, I'm safe for now. He turned his attention back to the road. The headlights stretched farther into the darkness now. The rain made halos around distant shapes. Trees leaned inward along parts of the highway, branches dripping. The road dipped slightly again about half a mile ahead. Elias leaned forward a little. Slow down. The driver eased off the accelerator. The vehicle rolled quietly. The dip came closer. Headlights washed over the asphalt. Elias studied the shoulder carefully. Something caught the edge of the light. A shape where the trees bent inward. Too straight, too dark. He pointed. There. The driver stopped the SUV. The engine idled softly. The security man leaned forward. What do you see? Elias kept staring at the shadow. Rain shifted across the windshield. Then the headlights reflected faintly off glass. A vehicle, parked deep behind the trees, facing the road, waiting. Elias spoke quietly. Second position. The security man exhaled slowly. Damn. No movement came from the hidden vehicle. No doors opening, no engine starting, just silence beneath the rain. But Elias knew something important now. The plan had been real, carefully arranged, and if the first tire hadn't blown early, the sedan would have come flying over that dip at full speed, straight into whatever waited in those trees. He leaned back slowly in the seat. The weight of the night settled heavier across his shoulders, because whoever built this trap had expected it to work. The SUV idled quietly in the rain. No one rushed forward. The hidden vehicle stayed where it was, half swallowed by the trees. Only the faint reflection of glass in the headlights gave it away. Elias kept watching it. Sometimes people panicked when they were discovered. Engines roared. Doors slammed. Someone ran. Nothing moved there. Just rain sliding off branches. The security man spoke first. Engine off. The driver cut the ignition. The sudden silence felt heavier than the sound had. Rain tapped the roof. Somewhere water dripped from leaves onto metal. The security man turned slightly toward the back seat where Elias sat. You were right. Elias didn't respond. He leaned forward again, studying the slope leading down toward the hidden car. The ditch was shallow but wide enough to hide most of a vehicle if you parked carefully. The kind of spot someone would pick if they'd walked the road ahead of time. One of the guards spoke into the radio softly. Second position confirmed. Static crackled. Another SUV stopped several car lengths behind them. Its headlights dimmed slightly. The woman in the front passenger seat had ended her phone call. Her hand still held the device loosely near her lap. She looked out at the dark shape behind the trees. That car was waiting for me. Elias heard the quiet certainty in her voice. No one corrected her. The security man opened his door slowly. Cold air and rain spilled inside. Let's take a look. Two guards stepped out with him. Flashlights cut through the darkness in narrow beams. Elias stayed in the seat for a moment longer. He didn't like approaching unknown vehicles. Too many things could still go wrong. But sitting still felt worse. He opened the door and stepped out. The rain had cooled the air enough that his breath showed faintly when he exhaled. They moved down the shoulder carefully. Boots slid slightly on wet gravel. The security man raised a hand before they reached the ditch. Everyone stopped. One guard angled his flashlight through the branches. The vehicle became clearer now. Dark gray sedan. Older model. Windows tinted. The engine was off. No movement inside. The security man studied it for several seconds. Then he nodded to one of his men. The guard moved down the slope slowly, light steady. Elias followed halfway, staying near the road. His eyes kept moving. Road, trees, shadows. The guard reached the driver's side door and pulled gently. It opened. Empty. Clear, he called quietly. Another guard checked the back seat. Empty here too. The trunk was open next. Nothing. No weapons. No bags. Just an abandoned car. The security man stepped down beside it. He looked around the interior carefully, then crouched near the front tire. His flashlight swept across the ground. Tire marks again. Fresh, pointing toward the road where they had been waiting earlier. He stood. They left fast. Elias walked a few steps closer now. The rain had washed away some of the tracks, but not all. He studied the angle of the car. The front pointed directly toward the dip in the road. Not the shoulder, the road itself. He spoke quietly. If she spun there, the security man nodded. They would have pulled out. One of the guards leaned inside the sedan again. Keys are gone, so they walked or had another vehicle. Elias looked toward the trees beyond the ditch, dark shapes stretching deeper into the woods. People could disappear quickly in terrain like that. especially if they knew the ground. The woman had stepped out of the SUV now. One guard stayed beside her as she approached the edge of the road. She looked down at the abandoned sedan. "You said there might be more traps." Elias rubbed the back of his neck again. Rain soaked through his jacket completely now. "I said there might be." The security man watched him carefully. "You still think so?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and looked back the direction they had come from. The first tire, the metal fragments, the culvert, now this vehicle. It wasn't random. Someone had designed the night in stages, which meant one thing. People who planned like this rarely trusted a single step. He looked down the road ahead again. "How far until the next town?" he asked. The security man answered immediately. 7 miles. Elias nodded slowly. "That's a long stretch of empty road." The man understood what he meant. "You think they prepared something closer to the town?" "Maybe." "Why there?" "More traffic." Elias crouched near the sedan's front tire. The tread was wet, but still warm enough that steam rose faintly when rain hit it. They wouldn't want attention out here if the first plan failed. The guard beside him frowned. "You're saying this wasn't the final attempt?" Elias stood again. "I'm saying whoever planned it thought ahead." The security man looked at the dark highway stretching forward, then back at the sedan. His jaw tightened slightly. "Walker." Elias met his eyes. "How sure are you about that tire earlier?" Elias thought about the clean tear again, the precise metal fragments, the timing of the blowout. "Pretty sure." The man nodded slowly. "Then someone spent time planning this?" "Yes." Another guard spoke quietly. "If they had this position ready, they probably had another vehicle waiting nearby." Elias looked at him. "That's what I'd do." The rain intensified briefly, drumming harder against the road. The security man closed the sedan door and stepped back. "We're not staying here." Everyone agreed without saying it. They moved back toward the SUVs. The woman walked beside Elias for a moment. "You knew what to look for before any of them." Elias kept his eyes on the road. "Just noticed things." "That's not just noticing." He didn't respond. The SUV doors closed again. Engines started. Warm air filled the cabin once more. Elias sat back, watching the dark highway ahead through the windshield. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then the security man said quietly, "Walker." "Yeah." "You said something earlier." Elias glanced toward him. "About sidewalls." The man leaned back slightly. "You said they don't fail like that." Elias nodded. "They don't." The security man folded his arms. "Then someone had to cut it." "Yes." "Which means they had access to the car." Elias looked toward the woman in the front seat. She stared forward now, very still. Rain ran slowly down the glass in front of her. The weight of that realization settled quietly inside the vehicle. Because cutting the tire meant something simple. Someone had been close to her car before she ever reached this road. The SUV began moving again. Slow at first. Headlights washed over the wet highway, stretching the shadows of the trees across the pavement. The abandoned sedan disappeared behind them within seconds, swallowed by rain and darkness. No one spoke for a while. The realization hung quietly in the cabin. Someone had been close enough to the woman's car to damage the tire before she ever reached the highway. That meant planning. Access. Time. Elias watched the road while the thought settled deeper. He had seen operations built that way before. The visible part, the road, the waiting car, the ambush point, was usually only the middle of the story. The beginning always happened somewhere ordinary. A parking garage, a hotel lot, a quiet street, somewhere no one expected trouble. The security man broke the silence. "Where did the car come from tonight?" The question was directed toward the woman. She answered without turning around. "My office." "Underground parking?" "Yes." "Private?" "Yes." The man nodded slightly, thinking. "Security cameras. Several. Attendants? No. Access is restricted." Another pause. Elias felt the weight of that information settle in the air. Restricted access didn't make things safer if the wrong person had clearance. The security man must have reached the same thought. Who had access tonight? The woman took a slow breath before answering. Employees, security staff, maintenance. And you noticed nothing unusual? No. Rain streaked across the windshield in thin diagonal lines as the driver kept the SUV moving steadily forward. Elias leaned slightly toward the glass, watching the edges of the road. The highway had grown narrower here. Trees pressed closer to the shoulder. Water pooled in shallow dips in the asphalt. He spoke quietly. Slow down a little. The driver eased off the accelerator again. Behind them, the other SUV kept its distance. The woman turned slightly in her seat. Do you see something? Elias shook his head. Not yet. But the quiet feeling inside him hadn't gone away. If someone had planned the tire, if they had waited at the culvert, if they had prepared the second vehicle near the dip, then whoever designed this operation had been patient, careful. And people like that rarely stopped after 2 chances. The security man watched the road ahead too now. What are you looking for? Anything that doesn't belong. That's a wide category. Elias nodded faintly. It is. The headlight swept across another curve in the road. Beyond it, the highway straightened for nearly half a mile. Open. Flat. Elias studied the pavement carefully. Rain sometimes hid details, but it also revealed others. Reflections. Small shapes that broke the smooth surface of the road. Something flashed briefly in the distance. Elias leaned forward. There. The driver slowed even more. What is it? Elias squinted through the rain. The headlights crept closer. Another flash. Low to the ground. Metal. The SUV rolled to a stop 20 yards away. Everyone leaned forward slightly. Now the shape was clearer. A narrow strip of metal stretched across part of the lane. Not large, but wide enough to catch a tire. One of the guards cursed softly. Spike strip. Elias nodded slowly. Not a police one. Improvised. Thin rods welded into a light frame that would puncture tires without being easily visible in the rain. The security man stared at it for several seconds, so the second position was backup. Yeah, Elias said quietly. If the tire didn't fail earlier. The man exhaled slowly. Then this would. The guard beside him shook his head. They planned the whole road. Elias opened the door and stepped out again. Rain hit his face immediately. He walked carefully toward the strip of metal. His boots splashed through shallow water along the center of the lane. When he reached it, he crouched. The spikes were short but sharp, enough to puncture all 4 tires if a vehicle hit them at speed. He lifted the frame slightly. Light. Portable. Someone had probably carried it out here not long ago. He stood and dragged it toward the shoulder. Rain washed over the exposed metal points. Behind him, the security man approached. You called that before we saw it. Elias shrugged. Just thinking like the person who planned it. And what are they thinking now? Elias dropped the spike strip into the ditch. The metal landed with a dull clatter. He wiped rain from his eyes. They're waiting to see if the first plan worked. The man folded his arms. And when they realized it didn't, Elias looked down the empty highway again. The rain made the road shine like glass under the headlights. Then he said quietly, they'll improvise. The security man considered that. Then he spoke into his radio again. Third obstacle confirmed. Improvised spike strip. A voice answered back faintly through static. Elias couldn't hear the words clearly, but the tone carried urgency now. He walked back toward the SUV slowly. The woman remained inside. Her eyes followed him through the windshield. When he opened the door and climbed in, she spoke for the first time in several minutes. How many chances do you think they planned? Elias sat back and closed the door. Warm air moved across his soaked jacket again. He looked at the road ahead one more time before answering. Probably more than this. Her expression didn't change much. But the silence after his answer felt heavier than before, because the highway ahead was still long. And the night wasn't finished yet. The SUV rolled forward again. Slow, careful. The spike strip disappeared behind them in the mirrors, dragged off the road like something that had never belonged there in the first place, but the feeling it left behind stayed. Elias rested one elbow against the door and watched the road through the windshield. The rain had softened slightly, turning into a steady mist that hung in the headlights. 7 miles to the next town. Less now. No one in the vehicle believed those miles would pass quietly. The driver kept the SUV just under 40. Too slow for someone expecting a normal highway drive, but fast enough that they weren't sitting still. The security man leaned back in his seat, eyes moving between the road and the mirrors. "You said they'd improvise," he said after a while. Elias nodded faintly. "Yeah." What does that look like? Elias thought about it. Improvisation on a road like this rarely meant something dramatic. People who built careful plans didn't suddenly become reckless when things failed. They adjusted. He glanced toward the shoulders of the road. If the tire and the spikes didn't stop her, he paused. They'll need something that forces the car to stop. The security man followed his gaze toward the dark edges of the highway. Roadblock. Maybe. The woman spoke quietly from the front seat. Or another accident. Elias looked at her. She hadn't turned around, but her voice carried the calm tone of someone thinking clearly despite everything. "People slow down when they see wrecks," she continued. "Or construction." Elias nodded once. "That too." The SUV rounded another gentle curve. Ahead, the trees began thinning slightly. The road widened just enough that a faded second lane appeared for a short stretch in old passing section. The driver slowed even more. No one had asked him to, but everyone inside the vehicle felt the same thing now. The quiet weight of expectation. Headlights washed across the pavement. Nothing moved. No other cars. No lights from houses. Just empty road stretching toward the faint glow of distant town lights far ahead. Elias noticed the glow first. A pale orange haze above the horizon. The town, still several miles away. The security man saw it too. Almost there. Elias didn't answer. Because that glow also meant something else. More roads, more places for people to hide. He leaned forward slightly. "Pull over." The driver glanced at the security man. The man nodded. The SUV eased onto the shoulder and stopped. Behind them, the second vehicle did the same. The woman turned around now. "Why are we stopping again?" Elias rubbed his face with both hands briefly. Rainwater and exhaustion mixed together on his skin. Then he looked up. "Because if they're going to change the plan," he pointed toward the distant town lights, "that's where they'll do it." The security man considered that. "You think they moved ahead of us?" "Probably. Why not attack out here?" Elias looked back at the empty highway behind them. No witnesses out here means no pressure. And they'd want control. The man waited. Elias continued quietly. "In town there are intersections. Lights. Buildings. Places to corner us. Yeah." The security man exhaled slowly. "Walker." Elias met his eyes. "You ever notice how this night keeps confirming everything you say?" Elias gave a tired shrug. "I'm just guessing." The man almost smiled again. "Those aren't guesses." Behind them, one of the guards stepped out of the second SUV and approached. Rain dripped steadily from the brim of his jacket. "We've got a problem." The security man turned slightly. "What kind?" The guard held up a small device, a phone, police scanner app. "And there's a report of a crash just outside town." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. "Where exactly?" The guard glanced at the screen. "Highway entrance near the first traffic light." The security man looked toward the distant glow again. "Blocking the road? Sounds like it." Elias leaned back in the seat slowly. "There it is." The woman spoke quietly. "You think that crash is fake?" Elias didn't answer right away. He stared at the road ahead. Rain streaked across the windshield in thin, moving lines. Then he said, "Maybe not fake." They waited, but useful. The security man nodded once. "If a wreck slows traffic, everyone stops," Elias finished, "and someone approaches." Silence settled again inside the SUV. because the picture was becoming clearer now. The tire, the culvert, the waiting car, the spike strip. Each piece had been built to cause one thing, a stop, and the road into town now promised exactly that. The security man spoke quietly into his radio again. Confirm crash location. Static answered, then a voice. The man listened for several seconds. His jaw tightened slightly. 2 vehicles, both disabled. He lowered the radio. Elias didn't need to ask the next question. Middle of the road, he said. Yes. Elias nodded slowly. That was all the confirmation he needed, because accidents rarely stopped perfectly across a highway unless something helped them do it. The woman watched him carefully. What do we do now? Elias looked at the glow of town lights again. The rain had softened further, turning into a drifting mist, but the road ahead still felt heavy with intention. He spoke quietly. We don't drive straight into it. The security man waited. Elias pointed slightly to the right. Is there another road before town? The guard with the phone checked the screen again. There's a farm road about half a mile ahead. Where does it go? Loops around behind the gas station near the highway entrance. Elias nodded. Then that's our way in. The security man thought about it. If they're expecting us at the crash, they won't be watching the back road, Elias finished. The man made his decision quickly. All right. He gestured toward the driver. Let's go. The engine hummed again. The SUV pulled back onto the highway. Elias watched the road carefully. Somewhere ahead of them, people were waiting beside a staged accident, waiting for headlights, waiting for a specific car to slow down. But the plan had already started breaking apart. They just didn't know it yet. The SUV moved again, steady and quiet. No one pushed the speed now. The driver kept the engine low, letting the vehicle glide along the wet road as if they were just another late-night traveler trying to reach town. Elias leaned forward slightly, watching the edges of the highway. Half a mile. That's what the guard had said. Out here. Half a mile passed slowly. The mist from the rain hung low over the asphalt, catching the headlights in pale streaks. Trees pressed in close along the right side, their branches heavy with water. Every few seconds, Elias glanced into the mirrors. Nothing behind them. Whoever had set the traps tonight had worked from ahead, not behind. That made sense. People who planned like this preferred control. You could only control what was in front of you. There, the driver said quietly. A narrow road appeared along the right shoulder. It wasn't paved well. Just a thin strip of cracked asphalt disappearing between 2 leaning wooden fence posts. No sign. No lights. Just darkness and mud. The security man nodded once. Take it. The SUV slowed and turned carefully off the highway. The tires crunched across gravel before settling onto the rough surface of the farm road. Behind them, the second vehicle followed. Within seconds, the highway disappeared behind the trees. The change was immediate. No wide open road. No distant glow of headlights. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the narrow path cutting through fields. The road curved slightly, then straightened again. Tall grass leaned over the edges, brushing the sides of the SUV as they passed. Elias watched the darkness ahead carefully. This kind of road could hide anything, but somehow it felt different from the highway. Less prepared, less staged. Whoever had planned the attack tonight had expected the sedan to follow the main road into town. Not this. The security man seemed to reach the same conclusion. If they're waiting at that crash site, they're still waiting, Elias said. The man nodded slowly. One of the guards behind them spoke into a radio. Second vehicle still with us. The woman hadn't spoken for several minutes. She stared out the windshield, her face calm but distant. Elias noticed the way her hands rested in her lap. Still, not trembling. Just folded together like someone who had already accepted how serious the night had become. After a while, she spoke. How long until we reach the gas station? The guard checked the map again. 3 minutes. Elias studied the road ahead. The trees began thinning slightly. The ground flattened. Fields stretched out on both sides now, dark and wide beneath the mist. The farm road curved again. Then a faint light appeared ahead. Dim. Yellow. A gas station sign. Old. the kind that hummed quietly in the night. The driver slowed automatically. Elias watched the intersection carefully as they approached. The farm road met the edge of town behind the station, exactly as the guard had said, a narrow side entrance to the same highway they had just left. From here, the staged crash would be just around the corner on the main road. But from this direction, they would appear behind it. The SUV rolled to a stop near the back of the gas station lot. The place looked half closed. One pump light flickered weakly. A small office building sat dark except for a television glow somewhere inside. Elias studied the road beyond the station. A curb led toward the main highway entrance. Flashing lights reflected faintly around the bend, red, blue, and white. The security man saw them too. Police? The guard with the phone shook his head slightly. Could be hazard lights. Elias leaned forward again. From this angle, the scene was clearer. Two vehicles sat sideways across the road just beyond the curve. One pickup, one small sedan, both positioned in a way that forced traffic to stop completely. No police, just blinking hazard lights, and two figures standing near the vehicles, watching the road, waiting. The security man spoke quietly. "That's our crash." Elias nodded. The two figures stood with their backs partially turned toward the town. They were watching the highway entrance, watching for headlights coming from the direction Elias and the others had originally been traveling, exactly where they expected the target vehicle to appear. They had no reason to look behind them, not yet. The woman leaned slightly toward the windshield. "They're not helping anyone." "No," Elias said quietly. The security man studied the scene. "Armed?" Elias narrowed his eyes. Rain and distance made it hard to see clearly. But posture told its own story. The way the men stood, the way they kept their hands near their jackets. "Probably," he said. Another moment passed. Then the security man asked the question everyone was thinking. "What now?" Elias looked at the intersection again. Two men. Two disabled vehicles blocking the road. If the sedan had approached from the highway like planned, it would have stopped here. The men would approach. Maybe pretending to help. Maybe forcing the driver out. After that, anything could happen. But the plan had a weakness now. They weren't expecting anyone from behind. Elias pointed quietly toward the edge of the gas station lot. "There's enough room to get around them." The security man followed his gesture. A narrow stretch of gravel curved behind the station and rejoined the road past the blocked vehicles. Not obvious, but passable. "If we go there," Elias continued, "we'll be past them before they know what's happening." The man considered it. "And then?" Elias leaned back slightly. "Then we keep driving." The security man looked at the two men again, still watching the empty highway, still waiting for headlights that would never appear. He nodded once. "Do it." The driver shifted the SUV into gear. The vehicle rolled quietly along the gravel path behind the station. The engine stayed low. The headlights dimmed slightly. As they curved behind the building, the blocked road came into full view again. The two men still faced the wrong direction. Still waiting. Still believing their plan was intact. The SUV reached the far side of the curve. Then it turned onto the road again. Behind them, the driver pressed the accelerator gently. The vehicle moved forward, past the crash site, past the waiting men. Neither of them noticed at first, and by the time one finally turned, the SUV was already gone, disappearing into the quiet streets of town. The second vehicle followed seconds later, and the trap that had been waiting all night closed on nothing. The town was quiet. Not the deep silence of the highway, but the softer kind that settles over small places late at night. A few streetlights buzzed faintly above empty sidewalks. Storefronts sat dark behind metal gates. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then stopped. The SUV slowed as it passed the first intersection. No one spoke. For several blocks, the driver kept the speed low, turning twice without being asked. It wasn't about getting somewhere specific yet. It was about distance, about putting buildings and streets between them and the road where the traps had been waiting. Elias watched the mirrors. Nothing followed. The second SUV remained behind them, steady and quiet. After another turn, the security man finally spoke. "Pull into that lot. The driver guided the vehicle into the empty parking area of a closed grocery store. The engine stayed running for a moment before he shut it off. The silence inside the SUV felt heavier than the road noise had. Rain had almost stopped now. Only a light mist drifted across the windshield under the streetlight. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the security man exhaled slowly. All right. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the body acknowledging it could unclench a little. One of the guards stepped out and spoke with the second vehicle. Their voices stayed low. Elias sat back in the seat, the warmth of the cabin finally reaching through his soaked jacket. His hands felt stiff. He rubbed them together slowly. Across from him, the woman watched the empty lot through the glass. "You saved my life tonight." The words came out quietly, without ceremony. Elias shook his head once. "No, you did. I changed a tire." She turned slightly toward him now. "That tire didn't fail by accident." He didn't answer. She continued. "You noticed the fragments on the road, the culvert, the second car, the spikes, the crash." Her voice remained steady, but something behind it had shifted. "Everyone else saw those things after you pointed them out." Elias stared at his hands. The grease in the creases of his skin had turned gray in the rainwater. "I've been on roads like that before." The security man glanced at him. "Convoy work." Elias nodded faintly. "Long time ago." The woman studied him for a moment. "You left that life?" "Yes." "Why?" Elias leaned back in the seat and looked out the side window. A flickering neon sign from a laundromat across the street buzzed quietly. He took a breath. "Because I promised someone I would." Neither of them asked who. Some promises explain themselves. Outside, one of the guards returned and leaned into the driver's window. "Local police are responding to the crash now," he reported. "Those two men are still there." The security man nodded. "They won't be when officers arrive." "Probably not." The guard stepped back again. The woman spoke once more. "They'll disappear." Elias nodded. "Yeah, and the car by the trees. Same thing." "Then whoever planned this will never be found." Elias considered that. Maybe. People who built plans like this knew how to erase themselves when things failed. But tonight hadn't gone the way they expected. Mistakes left traces. Witnesses remembered details. Sometimes that was enough. "Maybe they will," he said quietly. The security man looked at him. "You think someone will slip?" "Eventually." The man gave a small nod. "Hope so." For a moment, the three of them sat in silence again. Then the woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small card. She handed it toward Elias. "My office." He didn't take it immediately. "You should keep it," she said, "in case you ever need something." Elias looked at the card. Simple white. Her name printed cleanly across the top. He finally accepted it and slid it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you." The security man opened the door and stepped out. The cool air drifted inside again. He spoke briefly with the other guards before returning. "We'll escort her home from here," he said. Then he looked at Elias. "Where's your truck?" "Back on the highway." "We'll take you there." Elias shook his head. "You got enough to deal with." "It's not a problem. It's not necessary either." The man studied him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right." He extended his hand. Elias shook it. The grip was firm. "You ever want work again?" the man said quietly. "Call that number." Elias almost smiled. "I'm good where I am." The man seemed to respect that. The woman opened her door next. Before stepping out, she paused. "You didn't have to stop tonight." Elias looked at her. "I know. But you did." He nodded once. Then she stepped out into the mist. The door closed softly. Elias sat there another moment while the guards moved around the parking lot. The two SUVs prepared to leave. Engines started. Lights turned toward the street. One by one, the vehicles rolled out of the lot and disappeared into the quiet town. Soon the grocery store parking area was empty again. Just Elias, and the faint sound of water dripping from the edges of the roof. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees for a moment. The adrenaline that had carried the night was fading now, leaving behind a different kind of weight. Not fear. Something older. Memories of other roads. Other nights. Other traps. He sat there until the mist turned into silence. Then he finally stepped out of the SUV the guards had left for him to borrow. The driver had already given him the keys. "Bring it back tomorrow," he had said. Elias started the engine. The town streets were empty as he drove slowly back toward the highway. When he reached the entrance ramp, flashing police lights glowed faintly in the distance near the staged crash. Officers were already there. 2 patrol cars. The wrecked pickup and sedan still sat sideways in the road. But the men who had been waiting beside them were gone. Just like Elias expected, he didn't slow down. He passed the scene quietly and continued down the highway. A few miles later, he found his truck exactly where he had left it. The hazard lights had died. The road was empty again. He parked the borrowed SUV beside it, climbed out, and stood for a moment in the damp night air. The rain had finally stopped. Clouds were beginning to break apart above the road. Elias moved his toolbox from the borrowed vehicle back into the bed of his own truck. Then he returned the key to the SUV through the driver's window. Someone would retrieve it in the morning. Before getting into his truck, he looked down the long stretch of highway one last time. Everything about it looked ordinary now. Just wet asphalt under pale moonlight. No traps, no waiting cars, no hidden metal on the shoulder. The road had returned to being a road again, but Elias knew how thin that line was. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. The old motor rattled once before settling into its familiar hum. When he checked the dashboard clock, it read 1018 a.m. His daughter would be deep asleep now. He pictured the small lamp still glowing beside her bed. That thought settled something inside him. He pulled onto the highway and began the quiet drive home. The road stretched ahead in long, empty lines. No headlights, no hazards, just the steady rhythm of tires on pavement, and for the first time that night, nothing waiting in the dark.